I'm going to start it this way. Denise and I, we're corporate people. We're not diversity people. We were academics. We're not researchers. But we ran into this problem at Cisco. And so the question at Cisco was, what's going on? Why is it going on? And what can we do about it? And that was the approach we took at Cisco, and that's what we're trying to do here. And those are the three questions I think we're trying to ask today. What's going on? So you understand what's going on. Have certainly our perspective of why it's happening, once you understand what's going on, and then what you can do about it, okay? The question is, when we were at Cisco, is what can we do about it as leaders at Cisco? And we did those things at Cisco, but a lot of it had to do with what the community could do, right? So that's what we're gonna do today. I'll talk about the what, just because I'm an engineer and I love numbers, and Denise is not an engineer. She can talk about the soft stuff. There's some slides that basically, this is about Ascend. Ascend actually was started, a quick quote about Ascend. In New York, actually it was the big four accounting firms, when the partners realized that over 20% of their associates were incoming Asian Americans, but very few were making it to the top. In fact, most of them were dropping out because at those kinds of firms, it's up or out. And so they were finding that, it didn't make a lot of sense to train people and then they leave. So they really gave money to start Ascend. That's really what it's, and when it came here to California, most of the jobs were not like New York, where they're all in accounting, okay? And most of Asian Americans here are working in other industries. And we're from tech. So what Denise and I have been working on for a while is looking at data and quantifying what's going on with Asian Americans and other races, by the way. All the data is available. And we published a number of papers. The latest one was talking about Asians, actually, look at all races in Silicon Valley, 2017, and looked at EEOC data. The way we look at it is the data is available for populations by race and gender by job classification. And we're interested in, as we were in Cisco, looking at individual contributors, which are professionals, white-collar, college-educated workers, middle management, and executives. And the definition of executives is really the top three layers. Okay. Data is collected by EEOC. Every company over 100 people has to file an EEO-1 report, actually by region and by region, so you can just find out what's in Silicon Valley or in the aggregate. So what we're going to do today is look at some data nationally and locally, and we're going to focus on two things. One, we want to look at the pipeline by looking at how many made it at the top versus how many in the population. So the executive parity index, okay, the percentage of executives by the number of professionals. And middle management, management parity index is percentage of managers divided by inter contributors. And I hope that's a simple concept, just to understand what the fallout is to the pipeline. We're going to spend a lot of time, I think most of the time, on MPI, because whereas in corporate, we're worried about what's going on at the top, and there are a few of us. And again, when Denise and I were at Cisco, in engineering, there were two of us. There were two East Asian vice presidents out of 104 in 2006. Okay, 2%. In a population that was roughly 25% East Asian. Okay. And we decided that's a problem we need to fix. But today we're going to talk about MPI mostly because that's what I think most of the audience are worried about. You're all going to be hired, and the question is, what's your likelihood of getting them promoted? Okay. So that's a short-term goal you should think about, what's going on and what you can do about it on those promotions. Okay. If you take those ratios, anything above 1 means you're above parity, overrepresented. That is, the next level is a higher percentage than the prior level. If it's equal to 1, it's at parity, hence the definition. And then under 1 means you're underrepresented or under parity. I like to use the word under parity because it's not judgmental. There's underrepresented means there's something going on, either right or wrong. Under parity makes no judgment on that. So I like to use the word under parity. And then we can ask what's going on and why, right? So let's look at the parity. We also want to look at where Asians are in America. Using the EEO website actually has EEO data aggregated by industry. And just to let you know where we are, these are percentages, Asian professionals, basically the individual contributors, percentage-wise by sector, you can see. I'm also computing the MPI and API, but let's not talk about them. So we're going to focus on a couple today, a few today. One that that are the largest in the Bay Area. Information, which is like software companies, tech, professional services like Deloitte, EY. Okay. 33 manufacturing. These are IT manufacturing, so like Intel, for example, and finance insurance, Wells Fargo insurance companies. So those are the companies that most people from Haas or Stanford or other business schools here go to in the Bay Area. So we'll focus on those. Another chunk is healthcare, but we're not going to talk about that. That's really different. All right. So here's the national data. So remember the calculation: percentage of middle managers divided by percentage of individual contributors. Okay. So this is national data for manufacturing, IT manufacturing, right? One means parity. Above one means above one means overrepresented, above parity. Underrepresented is under one. What's the thing that's most noticeable about this chart? Right? Asian Americans suck. Okay? Look at this. Everybody's doing better than we are. Everybody's being promoted at rates higher than we are. At least a data point. It's one data point. Okay, 2017. Okay? Typically, that's a shock to most people. They don't expect to see that, right? Because we don't have a diversity problem. We're doing great, okay? We're successful. We're overrepresented. In numbers, that's right, right? This chart, by the way, the last chart, just to let you know, was 2017. So that says in that year we were underrepresented. The question of the next chart is, here's the same sector over time. What this says is that not only underrepresented, but if you look back to 2013, and actually we have data back to 2007, there's essentially no change over that time, okay? 12 years, 13 years, a half a generation. So whatever's going on, nothing's changing. That's what I want to tell you, okay? Nothing is changing. Okay, now people ask about millennials, and they said the data does not suggest there's any change due to millennials or the fact they're new immigrants. That's what this says, and that's in manufacturing. All right, I'm going to just go through a couple slides quickly. Here's information. This software. Numbers are different, but the conclusion is the same. Asian Americans are least represented. And basically, this is what suggests is the least promoted. Asian Americans are least promoted in manufacturing. This says Asian Americans are least promoted in tech. Asian Americans are least promoted in finance and insurance. This is a little different. And this is a financial, like Deloitte, a little better. Okay, Asian women are doing terrible. So nationally, it doesn't matter what sector you run into, you've seen the same effect. Right? Your odds of getting promoted are the least likely promoted of any race, men or women. Let's look at Silicon Valley. That's national data. So let's look at Silicon Valley. This is just for tech software, like Google or Facebook. Three things I want to note here. One is you can see that actually, in terms of individual contributors in the workforce, in tech, in software tech, basically, Asian Americans are now over 50%. African Americans and Hispanics, essentially, you can see where they are. Okay, they have a real problem. The other point of this, and that we have data going back to 2007 again, there's been no change in any of these curves. There's been virtually no change in percentage representation, blacks, Hispanics. The only change is that there are more and more Asians. Yeah. We'll leave questions till later. Sorry. Okay. Here's MPI. Here's how we're doing. Here's how we're doing in middle management. You got no difference. No difference nationally. Okay. And Asian Americans are the least likely at Facebook, at Google, any software company, at Oracle. We're the least likely to be promoted. The least likely to be promoted. No one knows that because we're not considered an underrepresented minority. Everybody ignores this. In fact, I've seen diversity and inclusion reports with no mention of Asian Americans in the report. That's our problem. Software, that's a problem. In San Francisco, that's our problem. In finance insurance, same thing. In professional services, same thing. It doesn't matter where you go, doesn't matter what industry, we see the same thing. We have a big problem. Sorry, I'm retired, I'm good. You have a big problem. You have a big problem. Why? Well, fortunately, Denise can tell you why.
So are there any questions for Buck on the data? Was there a hand going up?
Go to Mike.
No. Well, yes, it is. A couple of questions. One is the definition of Asian Americans,
okay,
as opposed to Asians.
Yep.
And secondly, in terms of those the MPIs, and I guess in your presentation it started to show, I wanted to know the actual numbers in terms of the population of the workforce, and I think the latter slides actually demonstrated that Asians were a significant part of the workforce.
So, yeah. So let me ask first question. First, it's Asian American, no difference. Basically, what's defined in the EEOC is of people of Asian descent, East and South. So both Indians and Chinese and all the above, and it doesn't matter whether you're a native or not, citizen or not, Asian descent.
Yeah, it's the EEOC definition is based on the census definition, which includes over 42 ethnic groups from Asia.
Okay. And second question, in general, nationally, Asian Americans are 12% of professionals nationally. Varies by sector. As you saw, software is really high. If you look at Silicon Valley, the numbers for 2015 were Asian Americans were in Silicon Valley 45% of the workforce. Whites are 42% of the workforce. In Silicon Valley, San Francisco and San Jose, blacks, Hispanics, Hispanics were like 5%, and Hispanics are 5%, and blacks are like 2%. Rough numbers. You look at if you go to the website and go to the study, you'll actually get the real data. Okay, and all the numbers are not just charts.
Okay. Any other questions around the data? One more.
Hi, Buck. So one quick question about the MPI and EPI. I remember it's like percentage of like executives over a percentage of professionals.
Right.
So that would be like Asian executives over Asian professionals, correct?
Right. It's like, for example, at Cisco, right? So Denise and I were there. We're 2%. We're 2 of 104, roughly 2%. 2% of the East Asians, okay, roughly in Cisco, 25% of the population was East Asian. So it'd be 2 over 25, which is probably less than 0.1, right? I can't do the math real quickly, like 0.08 or something. Really awful.
That was in an engineering organization of about 20,000 people worldwide, so really small numbers. Okay, so Buck took you through the data. Hopefully nobody's completely depressed yet, because I think we need to get to why these results, right? So just to put it in context, and thank you for that question about the population and definition, right? Asians in the US, just to remind ourselves, right? 18 million to 20 million now with the 2020 census coming up, roughly 6% of the total population. Roughly 75%, 3 out of 4 Asians in this country, right, as measured by last census, actually born overseas and not native born. 49% with bachelor's degree, very, very highly educated compared with the average in the US of 28% graduation rate, 21% with advanced degrees, and a lot of them, masters and PhDs and so on and so forth. And interestingly enough, Pew Research actually did a survey a few years ago and said that, and found out that Asians actually are pretty ambitious, right? They aspire to the top job. And in fact, in that particular research, what was interesting was Asian women was even more ambitious than Asian men, especially overseas-born, right? Foreign-born Asian women in this country even more ambitious than Asian men, right, to reach the top job. So you look at these statistics and you go, wait a minute, the Asians are really highly educated, right? And if you look at some of the other research, they show that we have the highest median household income, right? Much higher than whites and blacks and other racial minorities. And so we seem to be doing well, we're educated. Why aren't we making it in the workforce in terms of vertical mobility, right? So that seems to be the conundrum. So my question is, why, right? And when I ask people this question, I get a bunch of responses. People come back and they say things like, well, there are all these stereotypes out there about Asian still today in 2019, right? We're supposed to be post-racial, but I guess we're not. There are all these conscious and unconscious biases, and a lot of companies are working hard to invest in unconscious bias training and diversity training, but people still think that that's an issue. We talked about the Asians, whether or not they're ambitious or not, and the Pew Research says that we are. And people say, well, nobody asked me to be a manager. Nobody asked me, right? I mean, I've heard answers like this, and then there's just a whole slew of other responses when I ask why this gap that we saw in the MPI. Well, it's interesting. So when we think about it, and when we first found out these results in 2015, we decided to put our thoughts together on the narrative on why. And we came up, the authors, Buck and I and Janet, came up with 3 reasons. Right. First of all, you saw that there's a scarcity of Asians at the top. So having visible role models that we can look up to and feel that we can learn from is something that's missing, right? So it's not to say there isn't any role model, but there's just so few of them. You don't see them at the top. Secondly, there are gaps in expectation. I certainly know that culturally, I was asked to just sort of, heads down, do my work, and my work will speak for itself. I should be automatically recognized, right? And interestingly enough, in my career, I've never promoted anybody who didn't ask for a promotion. So there's some, differences in expectations as well in terms of what the formula is for success. And those kinds of advice that we got from our parents, that help us to get into some of the best schools and to do well and come out and get the best jobs, right? All of a sudden, that formula doesn't work anymore by the time you hit middle management, right? Somehow there's this Asian glass ceiling. And there are gaps in behavior as well, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about what some of these behaviors are, right? If you are really focusing just in your work, in the workplace, with just heads down, doing your job as assigned, right? And doing really well at it and hoping that the promotion will come automatically to you, right? Not going to happen. Not going to happen in a lot of cases. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but we wrote about this 5 pages worth if you want to go back to the Ascend report and read some of the thoughts we have behind that. So since we're in a school environment, I thought I would share this little cartoon with you, right? So this is, a ancient Asian sage, teaching a youngster, and it says, keep your mouth shut, don't make trouble, keep your heart not wrong, in other words, pure, and don't worry about it, right? That was the advice in the Confucian days, right? Don't stand out. If you stand out, right, the nail that sticks out will get hammered down, right? Not good. I was told not to be too visible. It may compromise my femininity, right, if I'm too aggressive or too assertive. And so the whole point here is that domain knowledge, right, and your technical functional excellence and your achievement in that, all the credentials, all the schooling, all the credits, et cetera, they do not translate automatically into organizational leadership success, okay? That's a completely different thing. It's not to say that, that you can bluff your way through and not have anything that you call your domain expertise that people can look up to, but it's to say that having that alone is not enough to break through some of these numbers. So interestingly enough, we talked about culture, and there's an organization called Aperion Global, and they actually do this study that those of you in the workplace may have taken this, but if you're going overseas and working in a new environment, you want to know what the culture is of that environment. You want to know what's the work style of your colleagues over there and how that compares to you. So they've done pretty large-scale studies, and this one we pulled out from 2015 with over 700,000 people responding around the world to it. And what you'll see is that on a number of axes, criteria, the degree of independence versus interdependence, egalitarian versus status or hierarchy, risk, taking risk versus feeling more comfortable with certainty, being direct in your communication versus being relatively indirect in your communication, being task-oriented versus being relationship-oriented. And what you notice here, right, two things. One is if you plot out the countries in the West, US, Canada, UK, right? Interesting enough, they're kind of on this side of being independent, egalitarian, individualism, if you will. Okay? And then on that side, India, Japan, China as 3 sample countries from the East, right, having completely different leanings and tendencies towards interdependency, group, conformity, hierarchy, right? Taking less risk because you want to be certain, right? Having indirect communication. You know, I remember when I was growing up, if my mother wanted to say something, you know, not too flattering to my brother, she would tell me first because, you know, I would just whisper to him immediately. You know, that's indirect communication, right? Or I know that, you know, my father still at that time was going off on his lunar calendar for his birthday. And so she has to be indirect about telling me that it's his birthday, right? So there's a lot of this indirect channel that we use. And so when it comes to relationship, right, we in the East, it's not to say that in the West we don't like relationship, but we take it to, you know, a new norm, right? So when I was working in China, people want to get to know me very well before they do business with us, and that's true in Japan as well. Okay. What you notice is that there's just big gaps, right, in terms of work styles and that translate into management culture. So those of you who are from, let's say, countries in Asia and then coming over here and being educated here and then working in an American environment may start to sense that there are differences in work styles between your work colleagues and what you're used to. Okay.
Can I make one comment about that chart? Just a random chart. So this is basically collection, the median points, but collection of the data of self-described behaviors. So the people in the U.S., Canada, normally behave this way, or that is behavioral norm. The ones on the right are behavioral norms for that. The question is, if you're in a system that has this as the behavioral norm, do you fit or not?
Right.
Because that affects your chance, your expectation of being promoted. Are you of that norm in that company?
Okay. Thank you, Buck. So what happened is some of the cultural beliefs actually lead to behavior. Let me describe a few of these cultural beliefs, right? Hey, you're smart enough. Just work hard enough, and you should be able to get into whatever program or school that you think that you deserve to get into, right? And once you're at work, make sure that you know your hard skills really well. I mean, Buck likes to say he's data-driven and he's an engineer, and I'm not. But on the other hand, we all have functional expertise. It could be in tax, it could be in supply chain, it could be in services, right? It could be in a number of areas, but we really think that technical expertise, right, sometimes are more valuable than soft skills. So we tend to go for more accreditation, more degrees, right? So conformity is a virtue. Again, the whole idea of not wanting to stick out and wanting to blend in and not be too visible, just in case, right? Politics. Another one of these things that I know that a lot of us grew up with, which is don't go into politics. Don't be political. As you know, politics has a negative connotation, right? So it's unfair and it's unnecessary, right? Just stick to your job, right? And by heaven's sake, do not fail, and certainly don't fail visibly, right? Because you would then bring shame. It would be losing face in many cultures. And by the way, it's not just that you're losing face, it's like your whole family and generations of ancestors would be losing face if it's too visible, right? I I mean, these are some of the things that some, Asian cultures actually subscribe to, right? It's kind of management by shame through failure, okay? So you want to avoid that. But the problem is these kinds of cultural beliefs that we're brought up with lead to certain behaviors, right? You follow a certain formula. You try to get into the best schools. Academic achievement, being at the top X%, right? Go to very well-defined professions and industries that grandma would even recognize the name of, right? I mean, that's really important. And you want to focus on the technical and the functional expertise. You spend all your time there. You don't want to get into anything too controversial, right? So avoid conflicts and any kind of deep engagement, because that may get you into politics, into negative politics. And so that's the world that we live in, right? So the problem with that, of course, is that you never then, if you stay on this side, on the left, you never then get into developing these leadership skills that are necessary. As you rise up, right, it's not just about doing your job. It's about doing the job, not just what you are assigned, but making sure that all the resources that you can oversee, right, collectively, collaborating with other people can bring a better solution to the company. And that requires working across organizations, across departments, right? And as you rise up when you're the CEO, it requires working outside the company as well. Regulators, for instance, right? Investors, shareholders, suppliers. So you have to work with a larger audience, and you need these soft skills, okay? And it starts very early. And one of the reasons that we're so happy to be here today is, I wish somebody had told me this when I was starting out in my career. But nobody guided me. And these are kind of lessons that we learn a little bit not too late, but it certainly should have been taught and learned earlier, so that there would have been a longer runway for us to develop these skills and for opportunities to surface sooner. Okay? So we're not saying that you should neglect your Asian values. They do play a role. They play a very good role, right? So working hard, we're not saying you shouldn't work hard, but you also should work hard enough, but don't forget that you also need to stand out. Be a voice for something. Have a perspective on something when you go to a meeting. When you go to a class, you're leading off a case, make sure that you have a point of view you're going to be expressing, okay? Technical expertise, well, why can't that be complemented also with leadership excellence? Be a role model that somebody else will want to follow, okay? Team player and team leader, family circle and business circle, right? I mean, my business circle today, since I retired 6 years ago, are hanging out with people like Buck. We're all really passionate about this area, and we continue to do work, and we continue to leverage all the business skills that we've had in our career towards a cause that we feel really strongly about. So that doesn't stop. Yes, on occasion you need to be humble and patient, but you also need to find a way to develop visibility and seek recognition. Maybe the recognition isn't just for you, but it's also for your team, right? And most team members want to go with a strong leader who they know is going to advocate for their success and to give them the recognition they deserve. We spend a lot of time on IQ, but IQ, it turns out, is relatively fixed. And it turns out that when you need to complement that with emotional intelligence, EQ, right? It's the ability to go and sense what's going on, have empathy for other people, and then adjusting the way that you behave towards other people with that understanding. So that's a soft skill. And it's not a hard skill, but sometimes it's very hard to actually master it. So you need to do both of these. We're not saying one or the other is alone is adequate. You need to find a way to do both of these.
Can I make one comment, Denise? This incorporates the biggest problem that I'll say a lot of people make, and I think Asian Americans make it in spades, is that the misunderstanding that you get promoted for the job you do. That's incorrect. You get promoted if they think you can do the job the next job, okay? So it doesn't matter how hard you work. If they think that's the only thing you can do and they think you're happy doing it, when I'm looking at people, if I think somebody's happy and they're doing great, I want to keep them in that job, okay? That's my incentive as a manager, right? If I know they want to do something else, then I have to keep them happy by giving them something else. But if I think you're happy doing what they're doing and you're great, I want you to keep doing it, okay? So if you want to get promoted, understand that fact.
Yeah. Another way of saying that is a very powerful lesson, right? In the leadership seminars that I teach for Asian women, I show them this chart that shows performance versus potential. So think of it as a 3x3 matrix, right? So up to the far right, you would have high performance, high potential. And the question is, would you rather be, if you couldn't be all the way at the top, the question is, would you rather be seen as higher potential and medium performance? Or do you prefer to be high performance but medium potential, right? And really, it's like stock prices, right? You learn in business school, stock price is a reflection of the future of that company, future expectation, right? So people promote you because they expect you to be able to operate at the next level. So you have to show that you are able to operate at the next level. In fact, very few of the milestone promotions that I've given have always gone to people who've already been operating at the next level for 6 to 9 months. So they're sure. Okay? So to be competitive and successful, what we like to recommend is that you have to balance what's good about Asian qualities and with some of the leadership traits that are seen in corporate America. So, what are some of these skills? Let's talk about them. Communications and influence skills. Okay, I think that's pretty obvious. If you can't convince other people of your point of view, then you're not going to have a lot of influence. But to do that, you not just need to do your homework, but you have to deliver the pitch, right, to convince people of your point of view. Leadership and collaboration skills. So it's about raising your hand and signing up for sometimes difficult projects, but you also don't do it alone. You can do it with other people. It's about working with a variety of people, a very diverse set, right? I mean, that's what leadership looks like when you are able to work effectively across the spectrum, both up and down the organization. So to do that, you have to have the EQ that I was talking about, the ability to figure out with empathy what drives other people, both personally and professionally, and figure out how you're going to adapt your behavior in a way that would be most effective in achieving the goals with that team or that person. Okay, so those are relationship skills. It also works, by the way. You have to spend time to actually cultivate these relationships. So it's not just about working in your desk. It's about cultivating relationship with your peers, with your manager, with the people across the organization. And in some of these milestone promotions that we talk about, typically my peers and I are in a room and we're discussing lists of candidates, of people ready to be promoted. And of course, there are always not enough slots for promotion for the people who are described to be ready. So as we go around the room, we have to convince each other why this next person is up at bat and deserves the promotion now. And if my peer said, "You want to promote Sally?" Who's Sally? What has she done? Who's Bob? Never seen him around, right? That's a kiss of death in a promotion conversation. So if you have no visibility with your boss's peer, that is not good. And the visibility you want to have, it should be a positive one. Okay, differentiation. There are lots and lots of people coming out with MBAs, with bachelors, right? How are you going to be differentiated? Right? They're all going after the same kind of employment, same kind of industries because they're hot right now, right? So what makes you unique? What makes you stand out, right? If we don't know what you think, what your issue, if you have an attitude or a certain point of view about certain things, you have a certain skill set, right? If you're not going to talk about it, people aren't going to know about it. So you're going to have to find a way to make yourself creatively and positively memorable. Strategic and holistic thinking. I don't care what job you're in. You're doing an assignment that's part of a larger picture. So figure out what that larger picture is and what the strategic intent is and how you can solve the problem at the next level. Even if you can't personally solve it, but you can think more holistically about what the assignment is relative to the business context. Okay? So these are the kinds of things where if you stand back and say, can I afford to take more risk? Sometimes it's an intellectual risk. Sometimes it's being in a meeting and just, saying something on your mind that is untested, maybe controversial, maybe it's only 40% baked, right? I see a lot of Asians in the workshops that I teach, right? They have what I call the Asian PhD syndrome, which is that when it's time to go and talk about solutions to a problem, the Asians don't want to speak up until they are like 90% sure that their idea is well-baked. Meanwhile, we see other people, seat of their pants, 20% baked idea, they put their thoughts out there, and then everybody else kind of piled on top of it and made the idea better. And guess what? The person who then spoke up was credited with the original idea. And meanwhile, your moment has passed. You had the same idea, but you wanted to be relatively sure. In fact, too sure. Okay? Well, then we're not hearing your voice. Okay? That's the kind of small risk that I'm talking about, right? Not just career risk and leaving everything and go to a foreign country, but we're talking about every day and every interaction. Can you afford to stretch yourself a little bit more? Okay? So we believe that these leadership and behavioral skills can absolutely be learned because we've been teaching them, and it takes a while to learn them because when you first adapt yourself to this new environment, you're going to say, well, that's not authentic. Right? I hear a lot of that. That's not me. It's not you only because it's unnatural right now. If I ask you to start brushing your teeth with your left hand and you're actually right-handed, that's going to feel very inauthentic and therefore very unnatural as well. But practice makes perfect, right? So we've been teaching a lot of these seminars now over the last, 8 years or so, and reached lots and lots of people. We both do a lot of mentoring as well, so we know that these skills can be taught. But it has to start with a mindset change. The mindset change is the things that I already talked about, right? You can see yourself being promoted. You know you can do this because there are other people who've done it. It's just that we haven't gotten our fair share, okay? But you got to think about not just those technical, functional skills. You have to think about some of the soft skills that will make you stand out as a leader. So Ascend actually has programs that can help this, and this is an eye chart. But basically what it says is that we have programs from early in career as a professional all the way to the top when executives are looking for public board director seats. So we do training, we do leadership workshops, we go around to companies and we talk to them as well, and we do mentoring. So we're trying in 8 to 10 major metropolitan areas within the United States to spread the word and to, get the research out there and also to give talks like this and then have people come to some of the seminars. But quite aside from Ascend, both Buck and I have done a lot of mentoring for other organizations as well. Increasingly, as I spend more time helping with mid-level Asian managers get to the next level, to executive level, what I realize is that some of these skills should have been taught earlier. They should have been learned earlier. So that's why I'm really excited to be here, because I know that you're early in your career and hopefully some of this makes sense. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. We're open for Q&A.
Any questions? Oh, you want to do this? Go to the mic, I guess.
If you could come up to the mics, there's one on the other side as well. That would be
great. Cool. Thanks for just coming here in the presentation. Question I wanted to ask is, have you looked at data by generation? For example, like first generation, second generation, and so on and so forth. The reason I bring that up is because I think you had a stat that said it was like 74% of Asians are foreign born. In executive positions and even like middle management positions, really leadership positions, you even said communication is one of the values, right? And oftentimes people who aren't born in this country, like Asians especially, and especially if you didn't come to this country after a certain age, you have accents, right? And that is, like, I don't know if it's officially, but that's usually viewed as a weakness. So I'm just curious if you looked at it by generation. I realize that data may not be available. I think that's something that if you maybe look at it over a 25-year span, like maybe there would be some improvements.
Okay. So we don't. If you go back to the don't matter. The study reported in 2017, which looked at 2007 and 2015 data, and we actually have it to 2017. So we have 2007, 2017. If you look at the middle management curves, okay, there's essentially no change. That suggests that if there were any millennial effect, because if you look at 2007, that's when millennials were just getting into middle management. And you look at 2017, 10 years later, they should all be middle management. There's no change. So the data does not suggest that generations have made a difference. Now, it's only 10 years, not 25 years, but you would expect some change, especially when you see the percentage of Asians going up to somewhere around 40% to over 50% now, or close to 50%. So there's no data that suggests there is. The other comment I want to make, and I want to make this, is with regard to accent. And the only thing I would point out is Indians and Chinese.
Both have accents.
Both have accents. And I'll say in Cisco, the stronger accent at the middle management level were Indians, yet they're doing much better. They're not doing as well as they could. They still have a problem, but they're doing much better than Chinese or East Asians. So suggest it's a problem, but whatever the problem is, it's worse for Asians. Okay.
So I want to address that really quickly. It comes up a lot in my leadership workshops. Don't be afraid of your accent, right? So we work in a pluralistic workforce here in the Bay Area. And what I want to say is that some groups have stronger accent than other, but it does not hold them back from speaking up. Okay, so if you can't communicate and fully express your ideas the first time around, people keep asking you to repeat it, then you may have a problem and you should go and address it. But if you can be fully understood, then it's not your accent. So don't let that hold you back.
The other comment with regard to accent actually is also the data back in the 1990s, where basically it really was my generation, and there's been no difference. And so back in those days, there was no issue with accents. We're all basically American born. So data suggests there's not a problem, or not a major factor.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Mia Character, and I'm a senior here. I'm double majoring in business and media studies. I'm really interested in going into the field of diversity and inclusion, and hearing y'all talk about that, and how Asian folks aren't necessarily afforded the visibility, typically like on work websites and stuff like that. Do y'all have any ideas of how people in the diversity and inclusion space could include Asian American folks while also not hindering the ability of other underrepresented minorities like Black, Latinx, American Indian, things like that?
Yeah, it's an uphill battle. I was at DIFEST last week, which is a Diversity and Inclusion Council, and I was so glad I was there because most of the speakers were talking about the other racial minorities, and Asians were lumped in with whites. Right, kind of Asians and whites in tech, right? And so this is an issue. It is a silent issue, and it's an issue that we need to work on to kind of elevate that and say what is going on here. The problem with in this study that we had is that the Blacks and the Hispanics have a different issue. They can't get into some of these tech companies, right? For the Asians, they get in, but they don't get promoted proportionately, right? So what can we do about it? I mean, other than,
So I'll tell you my Google story, my Google and Facebook story. So the Google story goes like this. So I go into Google, and actually there's a vice president there, Megan Pai, who's carrying the ball and went into HR at Google. And the pushback she got was this. So, this will tell you what he said. He said, and the HR said this. He said, every year we do employee satisfaction surveys at Google, and when there are issues, we address the issue. And she said, the Asians at Google are the happiest folks here. They don't complain about anything. Everybody else complains, so we go fix those problems. So what you can do about it is complain, because if they think you're happy, then you're happy.
Yeah.
Right? So unless you make it an issue, it's not being an issue. Yeah. The other story, the counter story, is that I go to Apple and talk to the D&I people at Apple. And what Apple says is, Buck, you're right. The problem with diversity at Apple is that by and large, we address the issues for compliance. So there are metrics we look at, and no one is looking at the metric that you're raising. So unless you raise it, there's no internal pressure, there's no external pressure. So you going in a D&I and raising it as a question is a great thing. So these are things that you can do, right? Because no one else is doing it right now.
So you know, most companies still think of diversity first as a woman issue, a gender issue. So leanin.org and McKinsey just came out with its 2019 study, right? Asians were not really mentioned. So
Well, women of color.
women of color. Yeah. So that's something, you know, I would write to the authors, right? In selective study, it's just a silent issue in many circles. So, okay.
And again, so just because it's out and I crunch the numbers, because that's what I do when numbers come out. Yeah, the people doing the worst are women of color. You know, white men are doing great. White women are doing about as well as men of color. Women of color have this double whammy. They're both, there's a gender issue and a racial issue.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, my name is Joseph. I'm an MBA student here at Haas. Thank you for bringing this awesome data about the bamboo ceiling. I'm curious how you looked at this data and then came up with your 3 reasons for why that data speaks to those 3 things. And the reason why I ask, because I see those 3 things and it says to me that aside from the first reason, the issue is with us Asian Americans and that we have to assimilate better in order to be successful in organizations. And I think that lets off society a bit in the sense that they're not doing enough things to be inclusive for Asian Americans to succeed. And I think the example you gave about people being, you know, you don't have to be 95% sure before speaking up. Well, I kind of wish in my previous jobs people were more sure before opening their mouths, you know? And I think like there are certain things that companies can do to be more inclusive for everyone to succeed, and the issues that just Asian Americans aren't, like you said, usually included in those DEI efforts.
I have a strong point of view. Okay, despite best efforts and people mean well. Okay, if I look in Silicon Valley, by and large the culture has not changed in 40 years. If you look at D&I, look at numbers, so the numbers say is D&I efforts have not changed a damn thing. So either I can keep pushing the rock up the hill, or I can do something about it, which is change myself. Do I believe companies can change? Absolutely. I don't think it's going to happen in your lifetime. So if you want to push that, that's fine. That's a great thing to do, but it's not going to change the numbers because that's what the numbers say.
And that sucks.
But so either sit there and accept it or do something about it. And the only thing you can do something about it is do 2 things. 1, do something for yourself, and then do something for the community. Get the community to complain. Because we as a community are not complaining. And unless they know we want it, no one's going to do anything. And that's a rational thing for them to do. Unless they know it's a problem, unless people are asking for change, nothing's going to happen. Because all systemic, so there's no systemic pressure to change. So change yourself, do the thing you can do, but also get the community to change as well. Unless that happens, nothing's going to change. Sorry. It's unfair, but that's the way it is.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Tony, for sure MBA. 2 separate questions. The first one actually going to the very first question that was asked in regards to cultures and generations. I know you mainly talked about how generationally there's not a big difference, and I can understand that, but I'm really curious on the cultural side. I mean, I think regardless of whether you're a millennial or Gen Y or Gen Z, I'd imagine that where you were born has a significant effect on how you fit in with business culture here. So I was wondering if you were ever able to like parse out data with people that were born and raised here in the States, regardless. I mean, you know, as an Asian and with the background of being an Asian American, versus those that were, you know, born and raised abroad, and see what kind of difference that is. So, and then the second question is, I also wondered if you have any statistic on Asians that are managers or executives in terms of their performance compared with their peers.
I don't have any data on that I know about with the second question, right?
Yeah, I don't.
The first question, so the data that we stripped out from the EEOC does not, ascertain whether people were born in this country or not, okay? So we don't have any data on that relative to the EPI and MPI. But what we have seen over literally touching thousands of people over the last 8+ years, actually I've been partnering with Buck since 2006, right? Looking at our company, looking at other companies, and doing a lot of leadership workshops and focus groups and things like that. I have had even third and fourth generation Asians in my leadership workshop, and guess what? These cultural traits, some of them actually are very long lasting. So they still have traits that you would associate with first generation, right? For whatever reason. And by the way, it's not to say that you can't overcome them. It's to say to recognize when they're effective and use them, okay? And then to realize that you also need to extend yourself, right? And develop additional leadership behavior for when the situation requires it. Okay, so that's what we're talking about, the blending of the two.
The only inferred data that I have would be to look at the Bay Area, which in terms of immigrants are a higher proportion here than, let's say, Chicago, okay, and the numbers are roughly the same. So I can't say that. All I know is that the immigrants here the cluster of immigrants here are much higher because of tech than some places like Chicago, which is a little older. So again, I don't have specific data, but I can just, except for that. There doesn't appear to be a big difference. And with regard to generations and culture, the research suggests that culture can disappear after 2 generations. So it takes at least 2 generations, which is basically you got to get away from your grandmother and your mother. Okay, the next generation has a shot. Okay, but that's 50 years. That's a 50-year span, right? Because your grandmother impacts you as well, unfortunately, right?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Jia, and I'm currently a visiting scholar at Haas Business School. So I'm wondering how we could balance the relationship between the relationship and the task. Because you mentioned that relationship is also important here, but task is also important. So how we could manage it?
So do it with somebody else. Right? Try to get, most complex problems in companies cannot be done by an individual alone. So I look for opportunities to collaborate with teams outside, with my department and outside my department, and make sure that we are both task-driven, but we are also relationship-driven, and you get to know these people through working with them.
Can I answer that question indirectly? The one thing that all of you could do is understand this. There is implicit bias. There is, by the way, it's conscious. It's not unconscious, because people openly say, "Oh, Asians are great at math," right? And they're not good at anything else. So the point is, the thing that you can do for yourself is that define yourself and be sure in relationships with people that they know who you are. That you're not the stereotype. So do things explicitly to be sure you're not the stereotype. Because unless you do something, they will assume otherwise. And that's just natural behavior. You assume stereotypes. So things you can do affirmatively is be sure that people you deal with in your work and your friends understand who you are, what you're interested in, and not just good at math.